It began on an ordinary morning that would soon fracture the calm of a quiet Texas neighborhood. The sky hung pale over the suburban street, still streaked with the lingering haze of dawn. Inside a modest home not far from the highway, the sound of panic broke the stillness, a woman's voice on the phone, breathless, pleading for help. The emergency operator recorded the call at 6:43 a.m. The voice belonged to Celeste Rivas Hernandez. Her words came in gasps. Something was wrong with her husband, David. She couldn't wake him. He wasn't breathing. Within minutes, paramedics were dispatched to the residence. The first responders, accustomed to domestic calls, overdoses, and early morning accidents, could not have predicted how this one would unfold. When they arrived, Celeste met them at the door. Her hands trembled as she tried to explain what had happened. David, she said, had gone to sleep late. They had been arguing, but she didn't think anything was seriously wrong. When she checked on him that morning, he was unresponsive. The team entered the bedroom. David lay motionless on the bed, sheets pulled halfway up his body. There were no obvious signs of struggle. No overturned furniture, no broken glass, no noise from the neighbors. The room, at first glance, looked ordinary, until they looked closer. His body was cool, his skin pale. A faint trace of blood near his mouth, though minor, raised immediate concern. The paramedics began their assessment, but it was clear from the start that resuscitation would be futile. One of the medics quietly stepped back and radioed dispatch, possible deceased male, requesting law enforcement. As procedure required, the scene shifted from medical emergency to potential death investigation. Celeste, still in shock, sat on the living room couch. Her eyes darted toward the bedroom door as officers entered. She repeated the same sequence of events, how she had woken up, tried to shake David awake, how nothing worked. She insisted she didn't know what had gone wrong. He wasn't sick, she said. He was fine last night. The first patrol officer on scene noted her demeanor, distraught, yet composed enough to answer questions. Her clothing was neat, her hands clasped tightly together. The officer asked whether David had taken any medication or had been drinking. Celeste shook her head, then hesitated. Yes, he'd had a drink the night before, she admitted, but that was normal for him. She hadn't noticed anything unusual. Detectives from the local homicide unit were soon called in. In cases of unexplained death, especially of a healthy adult, every detail mattered. They photographed the bedroom, marked the positions of objects on the nightstand, and logged every item within sight: a glass, a phone charger, a watch, a pillow slightly displaced. Nothing immediately pointed to foul play, yet nothing ruled it out either. By mid-morning, the small street outside the Hernandez home was lined with police vehicles. Neighbors gathered behind their curtains, whispering speculation. To them, David and Celeste had seemed like an ordinary couple, friendly, private, often seen walking their dog together. No one could imagine what might have gone wrong inside that house. Detective Steve Fisher, one of the lead investigators later interviewed about the case, would recall that morning as deceptively quiet. When he arrived, he observed the body still in place. The medical examiner's preliminary impression was that David had likely been dead for several hours before the 911 call. The cause was unclear: no gunshot wounds, no knife injuries, no external trauma. Toxicology and autopsy results would have to tell the rest. Fisher and his team began canvassing the immediate area. They questioned neighbors, checked security cameras, and reviewed recent police calls to the address. Nothing in the records suggested prior domestic disturbances serious enough to raise alarms. Still, the detectives noticed small inconsistencies. Celeste's timeline of the previous evening changed slightly between statements. In one version, she said they had gone to bed around midnight after watching television. In another, she claimed David had fallen asleep earlier while she stayed up texting a friend. Minor discrepancies, but investigators knew that in early stages, such variations could become significant later. As the body was removed for transport to the county medical examiner's office, Fisher lingered in the bedroom, scanning every inch for details. He noticed a faint indentation on the pillow beside David, as if someone had sat there for a long time. He also noticed that the bedding was unusually tight around the midsection, something paramedics had mentioned. These might be ordinary, he reminded himself. But the more they looked, the more subtle questions emerged. Outside, Celeste paced along the front walkway, talking to officers and relatives who had arrived after hearing the news. Her mother comforted her, arms around her shoulders. Reporters had not yet shown up, though word was spreading fast. One neighbor recorded a brief video on her phone, whispering, "Something's happened to David. Police everywhere." By noon, the coroner confirmed David's death as suspicious pending autopsy. That meant the possibility of homicide could not yet be excluded. Detectives sealed off the residence with crime scene tape. The once quiet block was now a restricted zone, flashing lights washing over the white siding of the house. Inside the precinct later that day, Fisher reviewed the first round of notes. David Rivas Hernandez, 48 years old. Married. Employed in local manufacturing. No major criminal record. No documented medical conditions. Friends described him as even-tempered, reliable, and protective of his family. Celeste, 10 years younger, worked part-time in retail. They had been married for several years, though neighbors recalled periodic arguments that seemed more intense recently. When investigators conducted a preliminary interview at headquarters, Celeste appeared cooperative. She repeated her earlier story, that she had gone to bed, woken to find David unresponsive, and immediately called 911. Asked if there had been any argument or incident the previous night, she said no, only minor tension about household bills. She denied any physical altercation, the officers noted, again, her controlled tone. She wasn't hysterical, one detective later remarked. She was emotional, but not chaotic. Almost as if she was trying to stay ahead of the questions. That afternoon, as the autopsy began, the investigation quietly expanded. Forensic technicians returned to the house for a second sweep, this time collecting bedding, drinking glasses, and electronic devices. The lead medical examiner reported preliminary findings, internal signs consistent with asphyxia, lack of oxygen, though the mechanism remained undetermined. There were no clear external marks to explain it. It could have been accidental, natural, or intentional. Each possibility demanded careful proof. Meanwhile, detectives re-interviewed close friends of the couple. A pattern began to emerge from their testimonies. Behind the facade of stability, there had been tension. Arguments over finances, jealousy, and rumors of infidelity had surfaced. One friend said Celeste had confided she was thinking of leaving David but felt trapped. Another recalled David mentioning that their relationship had become toxic. By evening, word of David's death had reached local news outlets. The initial press release from the sheriff's department described it only as an ongoing death investigation. No arrests. No suspects named. For the detectives, however, the day's evidence already raised quiet doubts. The timing of the 911 call, the state of the body, and Celeste's shifting statements did not fully align. Something about the scene felt staged, not overtly, but subtly. Fisher would later describe the sensation as that instinct that tells you the picture you're seeing isn't the picture that was there last night. As night fell, technicians finished their final photographs. The house returned to silence, but the case had only begun. Over the next weeks, tests would confirm whether the traces found on the bedding and in David's system matched an accident, or pointed to something far darker. In the sterile glow of the medical examiner's lab, the story of what truly happened inside that house would begin to unfold, piece by piece, clue by clue. The morning after Daniel Rivera's body was discovered, the quiet Texas subdivision still buzzed with unease. Yellow police tape fluttered in the breeze while news vans idled at the corner, waiting for information that never seemed to come. For the city it was merely another headline, man found dead at home, investigation underway, but inside the Travis County Sheriff's Office, detectives understood that this case would not be simple. Detective Steve Fisher studied the preliminary report in silence. No visible injuries, no forced entry, no weapon. The autopsy listed only one clue, signs consistent with oxygen deprivation, etiology pending. He played the 911 recording again. Clara Rivera's voice, calm yet trembling, filled the small interview room. She pleaded for help, said her husband wouldn't wake up. Fisher had heard hundreds of emergency calls, but something about this one lingered. It lacked the chaos of panic. By mid-morning he and his partner, Detective Laura Kent, stood in the sterile chill of the county morgue as Dr. Rena Morales, the medical examiner, worked over the body. Daniel Rivera, 48, appeared healthy, no disease, no trauma. But under the skin of the neck, Dr. Morales pointed to faint hemorrhaging near the larynx, subtle, but real. Could indicate pressure, she said. Manual? Fisher asked. Possibly, or compression against a surface, she replied. The words hung in the air like frost. That afternoon Clara returned for a follow-up interview, her sister at her side. She wore black, eyes swollen from crying, yet her tone remained steady as she described the night before, an argument about bills, a restless husband, a morning of horror. She said Daniel must have suffered a heart attack. When Fisher asked if he had been ill or taking medication, she insisted no. When he asked if they had been fighting, she said only, not really. Her grief felt controlled, almost curated, and the detectives left the room uneasy. Over the following days they combed through the couple's digital lives. Credit card debt was piling up. Cell phone records revealed hundreds of messages between Clara and a man listed as Carla's work. The number traced to Eric Sloan, a co-worker at the department store where Clara worked part-time. Sloan at first denied anything romantic, but when shown the late-night messages, intimate, pleading, affectionate, he admitted they had been seeing each other. He claimed it had ended. She said she wanted to fix things with her husband, he muttered, eyes down. The discovery shifted everything. Detectives now had motive, jealousy, desperation, perhaps freedom. When the toxicology report landed, it confirmed a sedative, diphenhydramine, circulating in Daniel's blood at levels too high to be accidental. Dr. Morales explained that alone it was not fatal, but in combination with restricted breathing it could have proven deadly. Fisher replayed Clara's first statement in his mind. She had poured her husband a drink before bed. The whiskey glass still sat on the nightstand when police arrived. Tests found residue matching the same sedative. Could he have taken it himself? Fisher asked the examiner. Maybe, she said, but it was likely dissolved. 2 weeks after the death, Fisher and Kent invited Clara back to headquarters. The tone was polite but firm. They showed her the photograph of the whiskey glass. She admitted pouring the drink. When asked if she had added anything, she whispered, no. Fisher pressed, mentioning the chemical residue. She shrugged helplessly. Then he said a name, Eric Sloan. Her face drained of color. It wasn't serious, she whispered. Daniel didn't know, he asked. She said nothing. A search warrant for her phone and laptop uncovered deleted browser entries. How long do sleeping pills take to work? How to make someone sleep fast. Not proof of murder, but intent glimmered between the lines. The final confirmation came when forensic technicians re-examined the pillowcase under ultraviolet light. They found faint traces of makeup and long brown hairs not belonging to Daniel. The indentation pattern matched subtle bruising around his neck. The conclusion, pressure had been applied from above, consistent with smothering. Fisher stared at the report, hearing his own inner voice say, she sat beside him and never stopped pressing. A month after Daniel's death, officers arrested Clara outside her sister's house. She offered no struggle, only murmured, tell my mother I'm sorry. At the station she waived counsel and spoke quietly, I didn't mean to hurt him. We argued. He said he was leaving. I held him. He stopped breathing. I panicked. When asked how she held him, she answered, with the pillow. I just wanted him to stop yelling. Her confession became the spine of the prosecution's case, transforming an unexplained death into a clear-cut homicide. The news of Clara Rivera's arrest broke before sunrise, flashing across local networks as officers escorted her from her sister's front porch, hands cuffed neatly in front of her, her face pale beneath the morning light. Neighbors stared from doorways, whispering to each other in disbelief. To them, Clara had always seemed composed, polite, the kind of woman who waved as she watered her garden. The headline, Wife Charged in Husband's Mysterious Death, sent ripples through the quiet Texas suburb. By mid-morning, reporters clustered outside the county courthouse, microphones poised for answers. Inside, detectives finalized their reports, and prosecutors from the district attorney's office began preparing the charge sheet. Murder in the first degree, citing intentional suffocation of Daniel Rivera, with the motive of avoiding divorce and financial ruin. The case file included the autopsy, the forensic toxicology, the pillowcase fibers, and Clara's own recorded statement. For Detective Fisher, it was bittersweet relief. The case had come together neatly, but it carried the hollow weight all homicides do. He had seen the photos of the couple's wedding on their mantle, two people smiling, unaware of the quiet tragedy that would one day define their names. Clara was held without bail for 48 hours before appearing for arraignment. The courtroom was packed. Friends, relatives, and reporters filled every seat. When asked for her plea, she spoke softly, not guilty. Her new attorney, a sharp-featured defense lawyer named Patrick Duran, argued that her confession had been coerced after hours of emotional distress. He claimed the death had been accidental. Daniel had consumed sleeping pills and alcohol, and when Clara found him struggling, she panicked and pressed a pillow to his face in a misguided attempt to restrain him. The judge scheduled the trial for 6 months later, granting the defense time to review forensic evidence. Outside the courthouse, Fisher told journalists only what he could. We followed the evidence. The truth will come out. The months that followed were a blur of preparation. Prosecutor Elaine Grant, known for her precision and calm demeanor, built her argument piece by piece. She reconstructed the timeline, the argument that night, the sedative-laced drink, the deleted internet searches, and the physical evidence on the pillowcase. She painted Clara not as a cold-blooded killer but as a desperate woman who made a fatal choice. It wasn't a moment of rage, she told her team during a strategy meeting. It was control, slow, deliberate control. Meanwhile, Duran focused on dismantling the state's narrative. He called into question the integrity of the confession, the contamination risk of fiber evidence, and the possibility that Daniel's death had resulted from an accidental overdose complicated by sleep apnea. The case became a battle of psychology versus forensics, motive versus doubt. When the trial finally began, the courtroom atmosphere was electric. Every seat was filled, and local news streamed updates hourly. Fisher sat quietly near the back, observing the woman whose voice had once filled his office through the crackle of a 911 call. Clara entered wearing a pale gray suit, her hair pulled back, expression unreadable. The prosecution opened with a stark statement: "This is not a mystery. This is a choice to silence a man forever." They played the audio of Clara's confession, her voice trembling but unmistakably calm. The jury watched her reaction. She kept her gaze low, eyes fixed on her folded hands. The state's witnesses began with Dr. Morales, who walked the jury through photographs of Daniel's internal injuries. She spoke clinically, describing the signs of asphyxia, the sedative levels, and the absence of defensive wounds. He was asleep, she concluded. He never had a chance to fight back. Next came the forensic analyst, who explained the discovery of cosmetic residue and long hairs on the pillowcase, details linking Clara physically to the act. The defense countered by calling Eric Sloan, whose presence drew gasps from the gallery. Sloan appeared uneasy, admitting under oath to the affair but insisting Clara had planned to end it. "She told me she still loved her husband," he said. "She just didn't know how to fix things." Duran used his testimony to humanize Clara, painting her as overwhelmed and remorseful rather than malicious. After 2 weeks of testimony, the trial turned to Clara herself. Taking the stand was risky, but her defense insisted she needed to tell her version. In a steady, low voice, she described years of marital strain, emotional neglect, and financial tension. "That night we argued," she said, eyes glistening. "He said he wanted a divorce. I begged him not to go. He yelled that I'd ruined everything. When he tried to leave, I stopped him. I thought he'd calm down. I didn't know he'd stop breathing." Her words hung heavy in the courtroom. The jury listened, stone-faced, while the prosecution later replayed her initial police statement, pointing out inconsistencies and emphasizing her deliberate internet searches. "You wanted him to sleep," Grant said during cross-examination, "but you made sure he'd never wake up." Clara